You think attraction tells everything about a person. That belief starts small. A glance, a smile, a calm presence across from you. You sit there and notice ease in her behavior, and your mind starts filling gaps with assumptions. That is where perception begins to shift. You lean in without noticing. You relax your guard without deciding to. Something in her presence feels aligned with what you want. But alignment at first sight often hides what develops later. You sit across from her in a normal setting. Conversation flows. She responds with confidence. She holds eye contact longer than expected. You notice your attention drifting deeper into her energy. That is the first layer. Surface attraction. It feels harmless. It feels natural. But something small starts appearing underneath. A quiet discomfort. Not loud, not obvious. More like a pause inside your thoughts after the interaction ends. You sit alone later and replay moments. Her tone, her timing, her reactions. Nothing stands out as wrong, yet something feels incomplete. That gap between experience and explanation is where most mistakes begin. You dismiss it. You label it overthinking. That reaction feels safer than questioning what triggered the feeling. Most men follow that path. They trust intensity more than observation. They trust charm more than timing. And that decision shapes everything that follows. Because patterns do not announce themselves, they repeat. Now the first pattern appears early. It looks positive at first. Number 1, she is too comfortable with intimacy too soon. You meet her, and conversation escalates faster than normal pacing. Topics that usually take time appear early. Personal subjects surface without hesitation. She speaks with ease about closeness, attraction, and physical presence, as though the boundary between strangers and familiarity does not exist. You sit there and register confidence. Your mind labels it openness. It feels like rare compatibility. That interpretation builds emotional momentum. You start responding with equal openness. You adjust your tone to match hers. You match her comfort level without realizing the shift in pacing. But something subtle sits underneath. There is no build, no gradual emotional layering, no sense of progression from distance into closeness. Everything sits in the same emotional level from early interaction. That removes anticipation. And anticipation is what creates depth in human connection. You notice small signals. Her physical closeness arrives without hesitation. She sits closer than expected without pause. Her gestures toward touch appear early. No visible reflection before crossing those lines. You register it as chemistry. But chemistry alone does not explain structure. Structure forms through pacing, through hesitation, through gradual trust. Without that, experience feels immediate rather than earned. You sit in a moment with her, where a comment about physical closeness enters conversation casually. No shift in tone, no emotional weight attached. She continues speaking, as though nothing significant occurred. You respond. Interaction continues. But later, alone, that moment returns in thought, not as excitement, as question. That question stays unanswered, because the interaction moved too fast for clarity to form. A pattern begins to form here. When emotional boundaries appear absent early, experience starts to lose exclusivity. What feels new begins to resemble repetition. The mind interprets repetition as familiarity. Familiarity creates comfort. Comfort creates attachment. But attachment formed too early lacks foundation. You sit with her again in another setting. Conversation flows again. She leans in during a moment of laughter, touches your arm during emphasis. No visible hesitation before physical proximity increases. You notice consistency and speed. Not randomness. Consistent patterns. That detail matters more than intensity. Because repetition of behavior reveals pattern strength. You start feeling chosen. Attention from her feels directed, focused, personal. That feeling builds internal narrative. You begin assigning meaning to speed of connection. You assume rarity, but speed often replaces depth when structure is missing. You ask yourself internally why no gradual shift exists, why emotional pacing feels compressed. That question appears and disappears quickly because the experience feels pleasant. Pleasure reduces scrutiny. And that is where misinterpretation forms. Later in private reflection, a different realization appears. If intimacy carries weight, weight requires time. If time is missing, weight cannot form fully. That realization arrives late, after emotional investment begins. Now the experience shifts into interpretation conflict. One side of perception feels connection. The other side feels imbalance. That tension creates confusion. Confusion keeps attention locked. Now the second pattern begins. Number 2. She carries a permanent emotional wall. At first interaction, nothing obvious signals distance. She laughs. She engages. She responds with energy. She appears present in conversation. You feel heard. You feel acknowledged. But depth stays limited. That limitation does not appear in loud ways. It appears in absence of progression. You ask about personal history. She responds, but response remains controlled. You ask about fears or defining moments. She redirects softly, not abruptly, not noticeably defensive, just slightly shifted away from depth. You notice it, then move past it, because overall interaction still feels warm. That warmth creates illusion of access, but warmth without depth creates surface connection. You begin sharing more about yourself, personal experiences, emotional reflections, past challenges. She listens attentively. She responds with understanding tone. Her reactions match emotional expectations. That creates perception of mutual depth. But matching response does not equal shared vulnerability. One side opens, other side reflects. Reflection feels like connection, but reflection holds no additional access. You sit with her across multiple interactions. Same pattern repeats. You reveal more. She maintains controlled sharing. Not absent communication, controlled communication. That distinction slowly shapes imbalance. Emotional input from your side increases. Emotional exposure from her side stays limited. That imbalance grows quietly. You do not notice immediately because interaction still feels smooth. Comfort hides asymmetry. Later, during a deeper conversation, you share something personal. She responds with empathy. Her tone feels right. Her words feel appropriate. But after conversation ends, silence returns with unanswered depth. You realize something feels incomplete again. Not rejection, not disinterest, absence of equal opening. That absence builds invisible distance. You sit beside her during another interaction. Topic shifts toward vulnerability. She avoids heavy directions smoothly. She redirects toward lighter subject without visible tension. You register the pattern, then dismiss it again, because emotional presence still feels consistent. But consistency of surface does not equal depth beneath it. Over time, you notice something else. What emotional topics appear, she maintains control over exposure. She chooses what appears and what stays hidden. That control shapes entire dynamic. You start giving more to bridge gap. More openness, more patience, more emotional investment. You expect reciprocity through consistency. But reciprocity does not increase. That creates internal pressure. You begin adjusting behavior without conscious decision. Trying to reach equal depth through effort. But effort does not create access where access remains limited. Now conflict moments reveal structure more clearly. During emotional disagreement, her openness decreases further. During calm moments, surface interaction returns. That alternating pattern creates confusion between closeness and distance. You feel close during comfort. You feel distant during tension. That fluctuation builds attachment through uncertainty. Uncertainty strengthens emotional fixation. You sit after interaction and replay conversations again. You notice missing depth points. You notice repeated avoidance of certain topics. You notice consistent redirection. Those observations start forming clarity. But clarity arrives slowly, because emotional involvement delays interpretation. The pattern becomes visible, not through a single moment, through repetition across time, a presence that feels close but remains partially unreachable. That combination creates emotional tension. Tension keeps attention engaged. Engagement keeps investment increasing, and investment increases without balanced return. This is where the early structure of connection forms imbalance. One side builds emotional exposure, other side maintains controlled distance. That dynamic sets foundation for later patterns. Because once emotional imbalance stabilizes, other behaviors start making sense. The next patterns emerge from that structure, and everything begins connecting into a larger system. Now what looked like separate behaviors starts forming one continuous structure. You are no longer dealing with isolated moments. You are dealing with a pattern that repeats itself in different forms. Number 3, she has an overcrowded male network. At first, this does not look like a problem. You tell yourself she is social, connected, open. You sit with her, and her phone keeps lighting up. Different names, different conversations, different moments pulling her attention away in small fragments. You do not react. You observe. Then you start noticing repetition. Certain male names appear more than once. Certain conversations feel ongoing instead of new. You hear references to men you have never met, but who feel strangely present in her daily life. You sit beside her during normal interaction and her attention splits in subtle ways. A message arrives. She checks it quickly. Her expression changes slightly, then returns to normal conversation with you. That shift is small, but it repeats, and repetition builds meaning. You ask casually about one of the names. She responds with ease. They are just friends. That explanation feels complete on the surface, but behavior does not match simplicity of explanation. You notice timing, you notice frequency, you notice emotional familiarity in how she speaks about them. That familiarity tells a different story. You are sitting with her again, later. Phone buzzes at night. She glances at it, turns screen away slightly, not hiding aggressively, just enough to create separation. You ask who it is. She names someone you never heard before. Tone stays casual, too casual. That detail matters, because emotional neutrality during hidden attention often signals normalized external validation. You do not react outwardly, but internally, something shifts. Not jealousy, awareness of distribution. You are not the only male presence in her emotional field. That realization changes position instantly. Because attention divided across multiple sources reduces exclusivity. And exclusivity is what builds emotional depth in one direction. Now patterns expand. She mentions ex-partners without emotional tension. Names appear in conversation without hesitation. Stories are told in relaxed tone. No visible emotional closure attached to them. You hear consistency, not just one past connection, multiple references across time. Then something else appears. Male friends integrated into almost every topic. Work, life, travel, daily routines. Different men appear as supporting characters in different areas of her life. You sit there and start mapping structure instead of listening to stories, because pattern becomes visible. This is not random social variety. This is sustained male presence around one person. You notice something else. Female friendships appear less present in comparison, less depth in that direction, less emotional reliance there. That imbalance tells its own story. Because emotional validation often follows easiest available source. You sit with her during another moment. She laughs at something on her phone. You ask about it. She says it is nothing. But reaction shows familiarity, comfort with ongoing attention from outside sources. That creates internal comparison without words. You do not express it, but you feel it building. Now understanding begins forming. When multiple male connections stay active simultaneously, emotional focus spreads thin. And when focus spreads thin, attachment does not settle in one place fully. You start noticing emotional unavailability differently now. Not absence of interaction, presence of divided attention. That difference matters, because divided attention limits emotional investment depth in any single direction. Now the structure of interaction with you changes meaning. You are not entering a closed emotional space. You are entering an existing network. And inside that network, your position is not central by default. That realization changes everything silently. Now number 4 emerges from this structure, and it explains behavior that previously felt confusing. Number 4, she uses intimacy as currency. At first, everything feels normal. Closeness develops, moments feel shared, interaction feels emotionally connected. But then patterns appear around timing. You experience disagreement. Tension rises. Conversation becomes distant. Then shift happens. She becomes warmer. Closeness returns quickly. Physical affection increases. Tone softens. And emotional tension disappears immediately. You feel relief. You interpret resolution. But nothing was resolved. Only emotional pressure was reduced. You notice opposite pattern later. Things feel stable. Then disagreement appears. Distance follows. Warmth decreases. Physical closeness disappears. Not slowly, immediately. That precision creates pattern recognition. You begin connecting behavior with outcomes. Affection appears after compliance moments. Distance appears after resistance moments. That structure changes everything, because emotional closeness begins linking to behavior outcomes instead of organic flow. You sit with her during another moment. After small disagreement, she moves closer physically. Touch returns. Conversation continues without addressing core issue. You accept shift because emotional discomfort reduces. But underlying problem stays intact. Later, same issue repeats. That repetition reveals cycle. You are not resolving conflict. You are resetting emotional state. That creates loop instead of progress. Now, emotional connection begins behaving like response system, not shared experience, but regulated exchange. You adjust behavior unconsciously, avoid certain reactions, choose softer responses, not based on truth, but based on maintaining emotional access. That is where conditioning begins. Now number 5 becomes visible inside the same system. Number 5, she has mastered reading and controlling men. At first interaction, she feels highly attuned. She understands your tone quickly, responds with precision, reflects your personality accurately. You feel seen immediately. That speed creates impression of deep compatibility. But real understanding develops gradually. What you are seeing is rapid behavioral mapping. You speak about goals. She mirrors ambition language. You express values. She aligns responses accordingly. You feel connection building faster than normal. But what is actually happening is observation. She is collecting emotional data. Your strengths, your sensitivities, your reactions, your attachment triggers. Once mapped, interaction becomes guided. Positive reinforcement appears when you align with her expectations. Withdrawal appears when you do not. You experience emotional rise when validated, emotional drop when ignored. That cycle repeats. You start adjusting behavior to restore emotional highs, not consciously, gradually. This is where control becomes invisible. No force, no confrontation, just structured emotional response patterns. You sit alone after interaction and notice something. Your emotional state depends heavily on her response timing. That dependence forms attachment loop. You begin chasing stability through her reactions, not through your own center. That shift is subtle but powerful, because emotional regulation moves outside your control. Now everything connects. Overcrowded male network creates constant validation environment. Emotional wall limits true depth. Intimacy cycles create behavioral conditioning. Reading ability shapes response control. All patterns align into single structure, and what remains becomes clearer with time. You are not experiencing random relationship behavior. You are inside a system of emotional patterns that repeat until recognition happens. And once recognition forms, nothing stays the same again. You stop reacting. You start observing. That shift changes how every interaction feels, because what once felt confusing now looks predictable, and what once felt emotional now looks structured. That is the point where awareness replaces attachment, and silence becomes clearer than words.